Hello, my name is Troy Hadoop Campbell, and this is a book-worthy idea called The Fundamentals Problem. This book tackles the question, why is everything new and modern so hard? And answers, because we never mastered the fundamentals. It's hard to run a hybrid meeting if you never mastered the fundamentals of running an in-person meeting. It's hard to ask an AI program a question if you never mastered the logic of asking a question or iterating in general. And it's hard to understand modern psychology if you never mastered the fundamentals of basic psychology. If we want to get things right today, we need to learn many brand new things. Many brand new things. But just as much, we need to learn or relearn the fundamentals we may have never been taught, never mastered, or may have just forgotten. Welcome to Original and Powerful Ideas. My name is Troy Hadoop Campbell, and I use a scientific mind, artistic heart approach to capture original and powerful ideas so you can apply them in your own pursuits. I've spent my life understanding the science and theory behind how humans think and behave and applying those ideas artistically and practically as an applied Duke behavioral science PhD, former Disney Imagineer, Oregon professor, and consultant for Nike, Netflix, and many more. Across this podcast, we'll be exploring together original and powerful ideas captured in many different forms that are meant to be new and relevant to you, whether you are a world-class innovator, a scrappy upstart, or just a curious person with some headphones on. Today's idea is the original idea of the fundamentals problem, and this episode is in the form of another book-worthy idea. A book-worthy idea episode is where I present an idea that I think would make a great book. But instead of writing 300 repetitive-ish pages, I straightforwardly present the core idea to help you have a big realization and then broadly apply the idea enough to help you start to see it in many different shades and apply it in your own world. This book builds from a wealth of modern research, including some of my own, and my own work teaching the fundamentals and pioneering the new stuff in academia and innovative companies such as Nike, Apple, and Microsoft. I've seen and experienced how the fundamentals problem can exist even amongst the brightest minds and within the most advanced groups in the world. After this book, you'll never look at modern problems the same again. All right, let's open the book. Inspiration. Recently, I was running a workshop for communication with people leaders at a major company. And we were doing a listening activity called Listen for What They Care About. This famous activity involves listening to someone for 1 minute to understand what they care about, and then repeating back what you think they care about, going deeper than just repeating what they said. The goal is to understand them, not to immediately solve their problems, try to relate to them, or to say something clever in response. At the start of the debriefing of the experience, someone in the training commented, "That was frightening how new that felt, because it shouldn't have felt so new." My colleague then asked the room, "Does anyone else feel that way?" And many people in the audience started nodding their heads, hands went up, and in a flood of comments, people offered, "I rarely listen like that. I'm always trying to solve problems. This did feel really different," such that so much of the room realized that they had never mastered basic fundamentals about listening. And this is the fundamentals problem. Leaders don't know the fundamentals of listening. Policymakers don't know the fundamentals of psychology and motivation. Data analysts don't know the fundamentals of doing basic descriptive statistics. And this is an invisible problem everywhere. For instance, many companies will spend millions on new technology to get rapid feedback from their employees because they think it is just so necessary to do that without realizing first, oh, we probably should first know the basics of how to listen to our employees in everyday conversations. Or if we do get all this data, we better have the fundamental skills to actually analyze and understand that data. Everywhere this is occurring, as leaders, policymakers, and people in general rush to advance solutions, modern technologies, and search for highly original ideas, like those you might listen to on a podcast just like this. The idea. The fundamentals problem states that today we struggle with advanced and modern challenges because often we never mastered the relevant fundamentals. Fundamentals can be easy or hard to learn. They can be basic, advanced, or even sometimes original, but they are always relevant to the tasks, and not mastering the fundamentals makes performing these new and advanced tasks much harder. This problem affects education, the workplace, politics, art, personal careers, inclusivity, and almost all aspects of modern society. Simply put, the fundamentals problem is everywhere. Applications. All right, to get a feel for the fundamentals problem, let's go through a speed round of applications. Understanding Gen Z psychology is hard, especially if you've never learned the essential ideas of psychology. Modern flexibility is really difficult if you never were formally taught how to have an improv mindset. Virtual ideation is virtually impossible to do if you were never taught strong ideation tactics, especially beyond those just put post-it notes on the wall tactics. Research, especially in its modern ways, is nearly impossible to do correctly if you never first understood how to create an annotated bibliography. Word problems in math are almost impenetrable for students who never mastered reading comprehension. Big data analyses will often lead people astray if they never mastered clear analysis design and confound detection. And innovative solutions are hard to find if people never learned how to clearly define a problem. An issue. Students today are learning coding, app development, and AI, and then being empowered to just make stuff, like a dating app, an exercise app, a mental health app, a decision tool, or a social justice guidance app. They learn the fundamentals for app development, but they lack the fundamentals for things like understanding the psychology of dating relationships, the science of exercise, the complexities of mental health, cognitive decision-making, and social justice nuances. So you have a bunch of tech students only learning the fundamentals of tech. The results is that sometimes their products can be harmful and largely overlook things. We've seen dating apps hurt people, exercise apps encourage the wrong behaviors, mental health apps go the wrong direction, decision-making aids fail, and social justice initiatives backfire. The failures we see in the real world are often because people didn't actually learn the fundamentals in that domain. They just learned the fundamentals in something like app development or storytelling, and then entered into a space completely empowered to take an action without any learning of the nuances. The problem and some science. Right now, humans may be biased to believe that new challenges should be solved by more new things. Human psychology has a general tendency towards a categorization bias that follows the sometimes incorrect logic that things from one category should always be solved by or associated with things in a similar or same category. For instance, humans tend to believe that big challenges are solved by big things, a magnitude categorization bias. But sometimes big challenges can be solved with small things, and sometimes new challenges can be solved by older or more fundamental things. Now, of course, sometimes new things require new solutions, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes, modern and new challenges can be solved, at least largely or even completely, with older and more fundamental ideas. The reason we do not see this latter point is not because it's not true, but because of how our psychology is biased to not see it. Warning, this example is a little intense and deals with depression and the pandemic. In 2020, as the global pandemic raged, we watched as so many in the world acted as if there was no way to comprehend the psychology of modern times. We watched as business leaders acted as if decades of science on how stress and isolation affects people, as well as research on how to properly work remotely, did not exist. And we watched as politicians and even many leading medical scientists ignored the most fundamental findings from science on science denial and resistance to vaccines. Eventually, many leaders in business, politics, and medicine, including leaders at the National Science Foundation, realized how they had overlooked psychological fundamentals. But it was too late, and a tragic mistake had been made. Citizens and employees suffered extremely, and many people even died because those in charge did not know of or know how to seek out the fundamentals that were relevant. Education in academia. Everywhere, at every level, students are graduating without learning or mastering the fundamentals essential to modern challenges. Let's start with business schools. A sizable number of business students graduate without some of the essential business fundamentals. The reason for this is often in how class time is not adequately dedicated to fundamentals, like problem solving, how psychology is straightforwardly ignored, and how communication is limited to very niche, Shark Tank-like impress everyone else settings. Furthermore, many students focus only on one part of business and can intentionally or accidentally avoid learning general and diverse skills. For instance, someone focusing on accounting or finance might never really be exposed to things like psychology and communication and negotiation and empathy, at least in a deep way. Likewise, someone studying the more psychological and soft side of business, such as those in HR, may never develop strong statistical skills, despite the fact that so many modern HR positions are data-heavy. Also, the business school system frequently does not encourage or enable good teaching. Many business educators are not academics, and many formal academics, such as professors, receive almost no training in how to teach. Even when adequate training is there, the educators are often not motivated or given the resources to succeed in the classroom. Professors are given more incentives and resources to focus on research or making their students happy. Accordingly, they hand out grades and facilitate other things the students and schools immediately desire or even require, such as networking, prestige building, and public outreach. If you ever wonder why people in leading positions often make such odd decisions, this explanation may provide some insight. There are of course exceptions to this, and I've had the privilege of working with many of these exceptions, but this is a common trend. And it's not just business schools. It's potentially most schools, at least in some way. Many students come out of high school or even college without the ability to reliably do acceptable work on a deadline, know how to learn about, research, and adapt to new challenges, or even just read with adequate comprehension. A solution. One way to address the fundamentals problem is to follow the 50-50 rule. This means when training people for modern or advanced challenges, focus 50% of the time on fundamentals. This might include things like how to ask a question, how to run a basic meeting, and basic psychology. And then, only then, should you spend the rest of the time on the truly new or advanced parts of these topics, such as how to ask an AI a question, virtual meeting tricks, and the psychology of lower attention spans. Note, the 50-50 rule is not an actual rule, and the percentages can vary. Lots of times it's a more 70-30 rule, and then of course sometimes it's the opposite, and it should mostly be new stuff. A tip, a trick, a theme, and one more thing. A tip. If the last time you formally learned something was in school a decade or more ago, a proper refresher is probably useful for you. So you should probably read a book, take a short course, or listen to a podcast on that fundamental stuff you once learned. Now, given that you are listening to this podcast, that refreshing is probably something you naturally do, at least to some degree. The real tip for you, especially if you're a leader or a teacher, is to encourage others and make space for others to refresh on the fundamentals. A trick. Put the fun in fundamentals. At Walt Disney Imagineering, my teams used to work on our scientific and engineering skills with regular fun events such as Build Your Own Catapult, and our presentation and creativity skills with blind slides competitions, where you had to improvise a presentation based on slides you'd never seen before. Those and many other activities kept the fundamentals fresh and strong, as we both practiced those skills and observed others, gaining additional insights. A theme. Why is it that the fundamentals aren't there? Here's a fun rhyming way to think about this across 3 categories. Never taught, have forgot, or it's only ever been a shallow thought. Never taught. This is when a person doesn't know the fundamental, either because the fundamental was erroneously never taught to them, or it is just a fundamental that no one really knows a lot about. They're not even in the textbooks. For instance, I would say that portals and multi-narrative storytelling and most of the ideas I talk on this podcast are fundamentals, but they're fundamentals that are not well known, well defined, and well taught. I've met many experienced designers that don't even have a fundamental model for how to begin an experience. And I've even met many brand professionals that don't really have a model for brand storytelling. Have forgot. Here, the person learned the fundamental at some time, but now has forgotten it. Without a consistent reminder, attention, and reflection on a fundamental skill, it can be forgotten, faded, or rusted. For instance, communication is a big one. Almost everyone in school was taught how to communicate well, but most have forgotten. That is, they've forgotten how to make clear arguments and thesis statements and clear supporting information. The things they learned in their high school English classes have faded. And of course, sometimes that needs some additional translation, often from a more academic form to a more practical form, such as moving from the classic essay structure to something like goal, insight, action. But in general, the core fundamental was learned, and it has now simply been forgotten. A shallow thought. In this case, people were taught the thing at some time, but they never really mastered it. They might know the idea almost as a slogan. They watched a TED Talk about it, but they don't really know it. They know it in a single shade, a shallow way. For instance, listening, design thinking, and argumentation, and many other things fall into this category, where people can name the idea and know it's important, but they don't deeply know how to listen or what to look out for in a design process. And they might know how to make a passionate argument, but they don't know how to make it clear, how to make it memorable, how to make it work for different audiences. In sum, fighting the fundamentals problem means dealing with the fundamentals that are never taught that we have forgot and that have only been a shallow thought. One more thing. And though the fundamentals problem remains largely under the radar, there are many people at different organizations and schools putting programs into action to address the fundamentals. Nike hires exploration training to help even their most creative innovators get more basics around the fundamentals of everyday creativity. And so many tech and science companies, from Microsoft to Intel to Owens Corning, are getting their researchers and scientists fundamental training in data communication. On the university side, schools like Duke University are teaching improvisation and listening in their business programs. The University of California, Irvine makes inclusion and diversity thinking essentially part of their humanities core. And schools like Cal Poly San Luis Obispo are offering classes in group design thinking, where students learn how to work and think in groups, assessing their own team dynamics and processes and iterating to behave better as a group throughout the class, developing an essential set of skills that are fundamental to the group work done in the classes at that school, in the workplace, and life itself. Conclusion. I know this episode can seem like a downer, but I don't see it as that. You all know there are so many problems in the world. This episode is thus positive because it offers a solution which says, hey, many of those problems can be explained by the fundamentals problem, for which there is a known and often easy solution. Teach people the fundamentals. So many of the essential ideas that people need to know, we already know. And if people were given fundamental training and understood how to translate those fundamentals across different new situations, we'd be living in a much better world. Keep it fundamental, Troy. This podcast is part of Hajduk House. If you want to learn more about this idea or many others, you can visit hajdukhouse.com. You can also check the show notes where you'll find my email, troy@hajdukhouse.com, as well as summary text and many links to help you remember and share the ideas of this episode. You may also want to visit oyf.com, where my colleagues at On Your Feet and I write a lot about creating values that have impacted many organizational and university cultures such as Nike, Disney, Microsoft, Oregon, Colorado, Cal Poly, and many more. There you'll also find a number of case studies. Thanks for listening. My name is Troy Hajduk Campbell, and I created Hajduk House to engage with the most interesting ideas and the most interesting people, always with a scientific mind and an artistic heart.